They say the loudest goodbyes are the ones whispered through suitcase zippers, not slammed doors. And in Jenny's case, the silence wasn't just golden, it was loaded. She didn't throw a fit. She didn't sob through a dramatic clothes-flinging montage. She packed quietly, methodically, like someone who'd practiced this exit in her mind 100 times before ever reaching for the handle. Welcome back to Sister Wives Daily. I'm Sarah, and if you've ever had your breaking point mistaken for PMS or just stress, this one's going to hit deep. Subscribe if you're tired of women being expected to shrink themselves inside someone else's fantasy. And tell me in the comments, would you have lasted this long in Jenny's shoes? Because for weeks, Jenny played along. She smiled politely as Sumit's mother micromanaged her Mangalsutra duties, laughed nervously while being grilled for not folding bedsheets Indian style. She even humored the idea that her personality could somehow mold into something more palatable, more obedient, more daughter-in-lawish, but deep down she knew this wasn't cultural adjustment. This was slow suffocation behind closed lips, and it showed. Dinner that night was tofu curry and quiet war. Jenny sat stiff, her movements measured, like even chewing too loudly might offend someone. Sadhna, as usual, found something new to nitpick. "Why are you slouching?" she asked in Hindi, loud enough for impact, soft enough to deny intention. Sumit remained buried in his plate. Didn't translate. Didn't defend. Jenny looked at him like he was a stranger, and maybe in that moment he was. Because complicity doesn't always come with insults. Sometimes it comes with silence. And girl, something inside her shattered right there. Not a plate, not a glass, but the part of her still waiting for him to step in and protect her. Earlier in the season, Sumit was all charm making breakfast in bed, announcing plans for our future, dragging out every honeymoon cliché like a teenager playing house. He'd convinced Jenny this was more than puppy love. He made her believe he'd chosen her over his entire culture. And maybe, on some level, he thought he had. But actions whisper louder than words scream. And every time he let his mother chip away at Jenny without so much as a raised eyebrow, that fantasy he sold her, it cracked. Quietly, then constantly. Jenny's smiles stopped reaching her eyes. She became a background prop in her own newlywed life. Cooking, cleaning, shrinking. Every day blurred into one long rerun of the same bitter episode. And when she tried bringing it up with Sumit, he dismissed her. Softly, almost sweetly, which somehow made it worse. "You knew how my family is," he'd murmur. "You're strong, you can handle this." As if survival was the same as love. The illusion of harmony was breaking, not in flames, but in whispers and cold dinners. Jenny wasn't yelling. She was disconnecting. Checking out of arguments she couldn't win and expectations she never signed up for. And that's when things shifted. Because when a woman stops explaining herself, that's not peace. That's the prelude to goodbye. And Sumit, he didn't see it. He still thought he had time. Time to stall. Time to pacify. Time to fix things eventually. But her suitcase said otherwise. It didn't scream. It just sat there, zipped and waiting. That's what hurt. Not the drama, but the calm before it. For her, this was no longer about whether she was right or wrong. This was about whether she could breathe in that house without constantly being told what she wasn't. And maybe the most heartbreaking part, she didn't even tell Sumit first. Because, at some point, she stopped viewing him as her safe space. The question now isn't if she's leaving. It's whether she already wired her next rent deposit before that final dinner was even cleaned up. It wasn't the big fights that wore her down. It was the 1,000 quiet corrections. The low-key critiques stacked like dust on every surface. And no matter how many times she dusted, it always came back just a little thicker, just a little harder to ignore. Under Sadhna's roof, Jenny wasn't just a guest. She was a project, a problem to correct. A passport-bringing, age-defying, cow-milking headache that had to be put through social rehab, subtle enough to not be called out, sharp enough that she'd always feel it. Mornings started with snide remarks in the kitchen. Not full-blown insults, just those passive-aggressive hums when she didn't rinse lentils twice, or when she cut vegetables too big, too American. Sadhna didn't need to yell. One lifted eyebrow mid-masala stir was enough to say you don't belong here. By noon, Jenny had already done the dishes, wiped down the floors no one else touched, and folded the laundry she was never officially asked to do. Not out of duty, out of emotional exhaustion. If she didn't do it, it would get done resentfully. Not out loud, but she'd feel the weight. Every action was a message, earn your keep. And then came the feedback. always couched in a half-smile or a well-timed translation glitch. Don't sit like that. It doesn't look good when you eat with your fingers that way. Maybe wear looser clothes, it's better for your age. All spoken in Hindi, within earshot, but not eye contact. Sadhna was an expert at surgical strikes that didn't draw blood, just bruises no one acknowledged. Jenny tried, truly. She learned how to blend spices the way Sadhna liked. She asked questions, offered help, bent over backward to prove she wasn't trying to insult traditions. But no matter how many points she racked up, her scorecard always reset. Because this wasn't about failed effort. It was about impossible expectations. Jenny wasn't the daughter-in-law Sadhna envisioned. She was too Western, too independent, too visible. Her existence wasn't quiet enough to be acceptable. And Sumit, he chalked it all up to culture. He'd gently brush Jenny off during her confessions. "Babe, in India, moms are like this. You're taking it too personally." As if emotional labor had borders, as if respect was cultural, not human. He never meant to gaslight her, but that's exactly what it felt like. Soft denial in a hard reality. Jenny was choking on swallowed hurt. And what's worse, she started to believe maybe this was her fault. That maybe if she smiled a bit more, bit her tongue a bit longer, this could work. Until one night, Sadhna didn't just critique, she corrected publicly. A family member had dropped by. Jenny made chai, poured it politely, handed it out with both hands exactly the way she'd been shown. But Sadhna, in front of guests, snatched the cup from her and said, "Not like that, like this," then laughed. Jenny smiled publicly. Behind her teeth, something snapped. Because correction in private can be love. Correction in public is humiliation. And that moment, surrounded by people who didn't even flinch, something in Jenny twisted. She wasn't in a home. She was in a fishbowl, every habit monitored, every Western instinct frowned upon. Every day, her autonomy chipped into something smaller. No one cursed her. No one hit her. But they watched her always, like a polite security system trained on her every move. And worst of all, she'd stopped telling Sumit. Why bother? He called it adjusting. She called it erasure. They spent evenings eating together in the living room, Sadhna watching over her like a quality inspector. Every bite Jenny took felt judged. Every glance murmured, "Still not good enough." And Jenny started disappearing. Not physically, not yet, but emotionally she withdrew, laughed less, stopped talking unless spoken to. The brightness she came in with slowly dimmed and no one noticed. Until she stopped showing up at all. Started taking more walks, longer drives, different markets. Excuses about needing air, needing sunlight, needing spinach. And one by one, those errands started looking more like escape drills, testing how far she could get without setting off alarms. Some days she didn't even want to come back, but she did. Until the night she didn't knock before walking into her own bedroom and heard Sumit's parents discussing her openly, like she wasn't standing 6 feet away. "She's not adjusting," his father said in Hindi. "She doesn't try," Sadhna replied. And Sumit, silent, no defense, no hesitation, no discomfort at all. That night, Jenny didn't cry. She booted up her tablet and started searching. Not for recipes, not culture tips. Apartment listings, studio flats, short-term leases, terms like no family, private kitchen, Western bathroom. And that's when she made a decision. Not loud, not dramatic, but dangerous. Because when survival requires betrayal, silence becomes rebellion. It started with closing the bedroom door a little slower than usual, turning the volume down on her device while scrolling, waiting until Sumit had stepped out for errands or was too busy in conversation with his father. These weren't the actions of someone planning betrayal. They were the quiet choices of someone planning survival. Jenny had reached that point where decisions weren't about what was best. They were about what felt least like self-betrayal. And her phone screen told the story. 1-bedroom, deli flat, furnished, Western amenities. She clicked, skimmed, clicked again, the tabs piled up. Options saved, deleted, then saved again. This wasn't fantasy apartment window shopping. This was preparation. She called a friend. Not one of those bubbly reality TV soundbite types, but a solid voice. A voice that had known her since Long Beach, when she still thought palm trees could fix broken dreams and reality TV would give her the fairy tale. Jenny didn't vent much, just dropped hints, kept it surface level. But when she said, "I'm not sure if I'm even going to tell him before I go," her voice cracked for just a second. Because that sentence wasn't theoretical anymore. She wasn't waiting around to be heard, to be validated, to be saved. That belief had expired. This wasn't about fear of being alone. She already felt alone in a full house. What scared her more was the numbness, the staring at walls during family dinners, the pretending she didn't understand the language when they thought she wasn't listening. She didn't want to freeze into someone she didn't recognize. Something had flipped. She didn't need Sumit's blessing. She needed peace. She needed a bathroom where no one analyzed how long she showered. A kitchen that didn't correct her cooking with side eyes. A space where not every move she made felt like cultural landmine optimism wrapped in bruised tolerance. And the part that hurt the most, she didn't even feel married. In her confessional, Jenny said it, raw and quiet, like the truth had dragged itself out of her throat. Sometimes I think I'm just tolerated, like they let me stay because it's too much trouble to tell me to leave. That line stuck harder than any fight, because it was beyond anger now, beyond disappointment. It was resignation. Not drama for the cameras, real, lived-in weariness from years of trying to be enough for someone who never stopped apologizing to others for loving her. Jenny wasn't looking for passion. She was looking for peace. And still, she hesitated. Leaving wasn't about packing bags. She'd done that before. It was about crossing that point in her mind where she no longer felt guilty for putting herself first. For years, she'd twisted herself into every shape she thought might work, just to be accepted, and now she was done shape-shifting. She emailed one landlord back, simple message. "Can I come check out the place this weekend? Just me." Her finger hovered before she hit send. Because that one email wasn't just a housing query. It was a subtle declaration. I'm not asking anyone anymore. And still, she didn't tell Sumit. Not because she wanted to deceive him, but because she knew what he'd do. He'd plead for time. He'd guilt her with family duty speeches softened by puppy eyes. He'd tell her things were gonna change, that he's working on it, that they just need to talk to his parents again. She couldn't afford that delay. Not emotionally, not psychologically. You can't keep having the same conversation with someone who already chose to ignore the answer. But the irony, Jenny wasn't cold about it. She still cooked, still smiled, still showed up. That's what made it harder. She was grieving the breakup while still in the house. She wasn't waiting for a blow-up. She was waiting for a crack big enough to step through. And despite the apartment tabs, the secret conversations, the whispered plans, one question lingered. Before she told Sumit anything, did she really go to his parents first? Because if she did, that changes everything. It happened midweek, mid-afternoon, mid-existence, when no camera crew expected drama and no cast member was rehearsed. The house was quieter than usual. Sumit had stepped out for errands, probably thinking everything was under control. Jenny was in the kitchen, measuring breaths instead of spices. She didn't wait for a perfect moment. She made one. She found Sadhna in the living room, folding laundry that wasn't hers. An everyday scene in a house where nothing felt normal anymore. Jenny stood there for a beat, watching the woman who still, after all these years, refused to call her daughter-in-law. Then, steady but calm, she said it. "I've been looking at apartments." No small talk, no buffer. She cut right through the ritual silence like a hot knife through cold tradition. Sadhna froze. The sound of fabric folding stopped. Her hands stiffened midair. Slowly, she looked up, eyes narrowing like she wasn't sure if she'd heard correctly or if Jenny had finally lost her mind. Jenny held her gaze. No apology. No explanation waiting on standby. This time, she wasn't asking. She repeated, quieter but firmer, "I'll be leaving this house." And then something shifted. Sadhna softened for a half-second, not with sympathy, but with control. "You don't get to decide that," she said flatly, sharp edges dressed in civility. "This is not your house to walk out of." That's when it hit Jenny. This conversation wasn't about peace, or family, or compatibility. It was about dominance. Her decision to leave wasn't being met with concern, it was being dismissed like a child's tantrum. "Sumit hasn't said anything," Sadhna continued. "If he hasn't agreed, you don't go." What shrouded the moment in even thicker tension was how quickly the mood flipped. At first, it was shock, then offense, then pure dismissal. Sadhna didn't rage, didn't scream. She simply looked at Jenny with a smugness that said, "Good luck making it on your own." They didn't beg her to stay, didn't try to talk through it. They acted like they'd been waiting for this decision from day one, as if her leaving was inevitable and pointless. That reaction cut deeper than a slap ever could. Jenny walked away from the room, but not before hearing Sadhna mutter something in Hindi under her breath, something intended to sting, not be understood. It was that controlled rejection that threw Jenny off. Not rage, but indifference. She hadn't expected hugs, but somewhere deep down she'd hoped for something human, worn dignity, maybe disappointment. Instead, they treated her announcement like an inconvenience before lunch. Hours later, the walls hadn't moved, but the air had changed completely. Jenny sat in her room, suitcase open but untouched. Not second-guessing, just emotionally recalibrating, reliving the moment, feeling the ache of being erased by people she'd tried, again and again, to win over. And outside that very room, footsteps returned. A key turned in the lock. Sumit had come home, and when he stepped inside, he knew. The air wasn't the same. The looks weren't friendly. His parents avoided eye contact like they'd been caught mid-scheme but still felt justified. Jenny wouldn't meet his eyes either. Not because she was hiding, but because she was done waiting for him to stop others from breaking her. He had no idea. But he was already walking into a house where the power balance had shifted, and not in his favor. The words smacked harder than expected. Because somewhere in all the dysfunction, Jenny had tricked herself into believing things were slightly mutual. That whatever their differences, they still saw each other as adults, maybe not equals, but at least two people trying. This moment shattered that illusion. She wasn't a person in this room. She was a variable, an outsider with no vote, a placeholder until someone more acceptable came along. They had let her in enough to control her, but not enough to allow her choices. Jenny didn't yell. She didn't need to. Her hands were already steady on the emotional eject button. In her mind, this had been the hardest part, admitting she couldn't do it anymore. Saying the words. Letting go of whatever fragile bridge they thought they had. But instead of grief, she got cold mockery. A tone that said, "You'll be crawling back here soon enough." And that's where the betrayal twisted into something sharper. Because Jenny wasn't upset that they didn't agree with her. She was hurt by how casually they erased her. Like she was never someone that mattered, just someone whose expiration date had finally arrived. The door hadn't even closed behind him, and Sumit already felt it. That strange, sour tension hanging in the air like burnt oil. Nobody said anything. No hello, no casual questions about groceries, not even the usual torrent of passive aggressiveness directed at Jenny. It was just quiet, too quiet. Then his mother spoke. "She told us she's leaving," Sadhna said, eyes fixed on the television like what she was saying didn't matter. Sumit blinked, confused like maybe he misheard. "She what?" Jenny didn't chime in. She didn't rush to explain. She stayed seated in their shared room, arms crossed, emotions locked down like a woman rehearsing control. Because this time, she wanted the explosion to land where it should, not on her, but on him. Sumit stomped into the room with his throat tight, voice already climbing before he even understood what he was yelling. "You went to them behind my back." Jenny didn't move. "You told them before me. Before even talking to me." Her silence was not weakness. It was strategy. Because letting him hear how loud he sounded all by himself, that was power. But the silence didn't last long. "I told them," she cut in, voice steely. "Because you weren't going to." That landed like a slap. Not because of volume, but because of the truth underneath. "You embarrassed me," he snapped. "You made me look like a fool in front of my parents." "Oh, now you care what they think," she barked back, springing to her feet. "Where was that energy when they humiliated me every single day?" Sumit's face twisted. She wasn't wrong, and he knew it. But pride makes people say stupid things when they're cornered. "You should have waited. We talk about these things together. You don't get to just..." Jenny cut him off. "Don't talk to me about together. There hasn't been a we in this house since we moved in." It was past the point of no return now. Months of silence detonated all at once. Years of trying to bend without breaking finally boiled over. They weren't even fighting about leaving anymore. This was years of resentment exploding in under 5 minutes. Sumit was pacing now, hands in his hair, searching for something, logic, maybe control. Jenny stood firm, unswayed. She'd been here before emotionally, but this time she wasn't crying. She wasn't playing the desperate one. "I'm not asking anymore," she said calmly. "I'm telling you I am leaving. You can stay here and play the obedient son for the rest of your life, but I'm not doing this anymore." That line gutted him, not because it was cruel, but because it was exact. When your partner protects their parents from you, not you from their parents, it's already too late. He looked at her like someone seeing the end for the first time. There was no chaos in her tone, no begging, no threats, just pure exhaustion soaked in clarity. "You should have talked to me," he whispered again, but this time it wasn't anger. It was disbelief. The realization that for all his effort to balance, he'd lost control somewhere between trying to please everyone and protecting no one. "And you should have fought for me," she said, each word a verdict. The house was still. On the other side of the wall, his parents lingered, pretending not to listen but hanging onto every syllable. Sumit never imagined losing her like this. Not in a screaming match, but in the steadiness of her decision. He wasn't the victim here, and somewhere inside, he knew it. All he had left now was a question he didn't dare ask out loud. Was this it? Was she really walking out for good? And if so, would he finally beg her to stay or simply let the door close behind her? The shouting had stopped, but the damage didn't. It lingered like smoke. Not loud anymore, but thick. Jenny stood in the doorway of the bedroom, her hands shaking, not from fear or temper, but from the emotional whiplash of finally hitting her breaking point in full view of the man she'd spent years learning to sacrifice for. Sumit couldn't bring himself to look at her fully. He stared, sure, but the eye contact wasn't solid. It drifted. Nervous. Like someone watching a train pull away and realizing, too late, their ticket was still in their pocket. Jenny's voice cracked before it rose. CaAaAAnt take it anymore. It wasn't pretty, wasn't prepped for prime time, wasn't polished into a TikTok-worthy moment. Her voice wavered, rose and fell like a body giving out mid-marathon. But that sentence, raw, real, brutal, needed no perfect delivery. Everything burst out with it. Not tears, just years. Years of staying quiet in rooms where no one defended her. Years of adapting while being judged. Years of pretending that cultural tolerance meant emotional dismissal. It all burst at once, not as a dramatic exit, but as liberation. Sumit flinched, not at her volume but her finality, because he'd seen drama from Jenny before but not detachment. She wasn't pleading for peace. She was walking into it with or without him. He opened his mouth, closed it again. "You want to stay here, with them?" she asked, pointing toward the hallway like it was a prison corridor. "Fine, then you and your family can live happily ever after without me." And then, with zero hesitation, "Kiss my $1. That one wasn't angry. It was surgical. The kind of sentence someone says when they've grieved all the way through the anger and come out numb on the other side. Sumit didn't respond. That silence, that was new. This was the man who always had a runaround answer. Always tried to soften blows with softly spoken logic bending reality until he came out looking like a helpless bridge between two clashing worlds. But now, on the night his marriage cracked like dry plaster, he had nothing. Wasn't reaching for her hand. Wasn't chasing down the hallway. Just stood there, quiet, watching her go. And that silence burned worse than anything else. Because when Jenny finally turned to grab the suitcase, the same one that had been packed for days, she didn't expect applause. She didn't expect tears, but she expected something. A word, a question, even resistance. But he just stood. No movement, no fight. And that told her more than words ever could. He didn't stop her. Not because he didn't care, but because he didn't know how. And that broke her all over again. The fight was over, but the grief had just started. Rage had carried her through all the insults, the microaggressions, the dismissals, the nights spent whispering to herself that love was worth the discomfort. But now rage was gone, evaporated, left behind. Sadness. And the saddest part, she still loved him. She really did. That's the thing they never show clearly on reality TV, the heartbreak after you finally do the thing everyone told you to do. You think it'll feel like freedom. And sometimes it does. But mostly it just feels like loss. So where does Jenny even go from here? Not just physically, but emotionally. Because once you realize home isn't a place or even a person, what's left to hold on to? The first thing Jenny noticed in the hotel wasn't the room's service menu or the giant bed she suddenly had to herself. It was the quiet. No judgment, no creaking hallway doors, no "you're doing it wrong" delivered in whispers too loud to ignore, just silence. And at first, that silence felt like peace. But by the second hour, it started sounding like loneliness. She sat by the window, scrolling through her phone, half-heartedly watching lights flicker below on the crowded Delhi streets. One notification after another kept buzzing in. But it wasn't texts from Sumit. It was social media. Clips of her meltdown had gone viral. Screen recorded, slowed down, meme-ified. But this time, the internet didn't mock her. People saw what she was carrying. And more importantly, what she finally dared to put down. Jenny is the poster child for every woman who begged for basic respect and got silence instead, wrote one user. She didn't walk out for drama, she walked out for herself. Period, posted another. A tweet with 50,000 likes read, "Marriage shouldn't feel like trying to win a competition you never agreed to enter." And maybe, for the first time in weeks, those strangers validated something Sumit never did. She wasn't crazy for having needs. She wasn't disloyal for drawing a line. She was just human and tired of asking for permission to be treated like one. The phone lit up again, still not from him. Back at the house, Sumit stood in the kitchen, talking in circles with his father, repeating the same tired lines. She overreacted. She didn't understand our family. I just needed time to balance everything. But the cracks had reached his voice. His confidence wasn't selling anymore. Even his father, stubborn as stone, gave him a look not of anger, not of sympathy, but one that said, "You let this happen." Sumit looked down, wiping the counter without reason, trying to keep his hands busy while his whole world slowed around him. Because now, he wasn't just defending his parents to Jenny. He was defending Jenny's absence to his parents. The irony wasn't lost. In trying to keep both, he might have lost the only one who truly chose him without conditions. And it hit him harder than he expected. He replayed it all in his head, the suitcase, her screaming, her silence. He tried to remember the first time she shut down. The first time she stopped smiling during dinner. The moment her laughter started sounding rehearsed. He missed all the signs, or maybe he ignored them. Either way, she was gone now. And Jenny, she stayed quiet that night, didn't cry, didn't post. Just stared at the ceiling fan spinning too fast for her thoughts to catch up. Because when you walk away from someone you loved for years, you don't exhale immediately. You grieve in waves. It's wild how in some marriages, the chase ends right after the wedding, and so does the respect. She turned her phone over and finally let herself feel the weight of everything. The years, the effort, the moments she folded herself smaller and smaller to fit into a shape that made his parents more comfortable. And still, it hadn't been enough. Because love might be real, but a one-sided fight for dignity, that's not marriage. That's slow erosion with lipstick on. The room was too cold, the bed too big, the silence too loud. But what haunted both of them most separately in different corners of the same city was the exact same question. Is this distance the beginning of healing? Or the quiet ending they were never brave enough to name out loud? There are moments when pretending no longer works, when the juggling act gets too heavy. And for Sumit, that moment hit all at once, sitting alone in his living room, surrounded by furniture Jenny picked, utensils she cleaned, slippers she placed by the door every night with quiet care. And now none of it felt like his. It felt abandoned. In his confessional, his voice cracked more than he probably noticed. No dramatic tears, no big speech, just that single line slipping out like truth he'd been biting back for too long. "I want both," he said. "I want Jenny and my family." Simple, impossible, because wanting both only worked when Jenny was still willing to wait. When his parents were still convinced, they had more time to push her out gently. Both sides were done playing. She'd drawn the line with her suitcase. His family had drawn theirs with every dismissive look, every snide comment, every refusal to adjust even 1 inch for the woman he swore was his soulmate. He pulled out his phone, typed her name, called, no answer. He waited a moment, called again, still nothing, then switched to texting. "Can we talk? Please just tell me you're safe. I'm sorry, I didn't know it would go like this." 3 gray check marks. No reply. And suddenly, the confident man with the long speeches, the one who once defied an entire country's social customs to marry a foreign woman twice his age, now sat folding into himself, spiraling with what-ifs. What if she never comes back? What if this wasn't temporary? What if I pushed too far and she finally stopped reaching back? The regrets came quick. He thought back to the first time they met, to sneaking around, the thrill of forbidden love. He remembered her glow, her belief in him, how she wanted this life more than he even knew how to promise. Had he wanted her, or the version of her who didn't ask for anything? He lingered in that question long enough to feel it burn. Later, he met with his cousin, one of the only people in his family who wasn't trying to control him with shame or duty. Someone who had watched the slow motion unravel, but never interfered. Sumit vented, still trying to blame the intensity of the moment, still painting Jenny as emotional for walking out mid-fight. But his cousin didn't let him off easy. "She took everything for you," he said direct. "Left her home, her country, her kids, endured your parents, hid your marriage, and in the end you kept asking for more patience. But what did you ever protect her from?" The silence after that question lasted too long to ignore. Sumit didn't argue because he knew it was true. He had spent years asking Jenny to believe him, to trust that love was enough, to wait for the day he finally stood up. Now that day was here, and she wasn't. He stared at his phone again. One message still unread. Maybe Jenny needed space. Or maybe she needed proof, not another apology. Not another promise she'd already heard by episode 6 of every season. What she needed now was action. Something real. Something public. Something undeniable. The bigger question, did he have that in him? Did he know how to unlearn the patterns of obedience, of avoidance, of being the good son at the cost of being a good husband? Or was it already too late? Was her silence closing the chapter or daring him to rip up the script? Because if there was one grand gesture left, it had to be now. His phone rang in the middle of the night. No grand premonition, no emotional buildup, just a cold screen flashing the name he'd been staring at all week. For a second, he didn't believe it. He'd almost dropped the phone, scrambling to pick it up, fingers suddenly too clumsy to hit accept. It was Jenny, not FaceTime, no crying, just her voice, clear, steady, unmistakably done. "I'm safe, but I needed to tell you something directly." Sumit exhaled like he'd been drowning, finally hitting air. "Okay, yeah, talk to me. We're not living there again." Not a suggestion, not a conversation starter, a line in stone. And the silence on the other end told her everything she needed to know. He was stunned. Not shocked that she made the decision. Shocked that she made it without him. She continued, no emotion, no cruelty, no begging for sympathy. "Even if you and I figure this out, I'm never stepping back into that house." Sumit didn't interrupt. Couldn't, because something was different now. She wasn't waiting for his reaction. Wasn't softening her voice to make the decision easier for him. She had already moved. And in that moment, his power, the ability to play middleman, to delay, to explain everything away until everyone calmed down, evaporated. Her voice was calm but final. There was no follow-up question, no "do you understand?" Because she didn't care if he did. He sat on the edge of his bed, pressing his hand against his forehead, eyes shut. "Can I come see you?" he finally asked. "I'll be here," she said. Next day he went to her hotel. No camera flashbulbs. No flowers, just him, in a shirt that hadn't been ironed right, looking like a man who'd finally figured out what he stood to lose. She opened the door, no smile, but she let him in. They sat, not together, side by side on two different chairs, like a negotiation more than a reunion. He started with apologies, the familiar pattern. Then he tried explaining again, the pressure, the expectations, the fear of disappointing his parents. It was heartfelt, it was real, but it was tired. Jenny kept her expression still. She listened, but she didn't lean forward. Her body stayed exactly where it was grounded. Then she asked what she needed to ask. "What are you choosing now?" Not yesterday, not someday. Now, and this time she didn't blink while asking. There wasn't a tremor in her voice. She didn't beg for clarity. She didn't hold his hand. She let him fumble through the answer on his own, heart racing, voice cracking through phrases like, "I need to make this right," and "I want this life with you." And when he paused, waiting for her to assure him all was forgiven, she didn't. Instead, Jenny laid out her terms. They'd live in their own space. No unannounced visits. Boundaries would be respected. No more sweet-talking her into submission. No more hiding behind "this is how things are done." If he wanted this marriage to continue, he'd have to show it. Not declare it, not just actions. Patterns. It was no longer his love to manage. It was hers to consider or not. And Sumit finally saw it. Fully. This wasn't just about moving out, it was about a total shift in balance. The woman who once clung to their relationship hoping it would save her sanity was now trusting only herself to do that. Some people wait their whole life for their partner to change. Jenny stopped waiting. He nodded. Not in agreement. In understanding. This was his second chance if she even decided to take him back fully. But the version of Jenny sitting across from him, she wasn't afraid of walking away anymore. She'd already done it. And it didn't destroy her. Now the question was simple, dangerous in its simplicity. Could Sumit ever unlearn 30-plus years of loyalty to compliance and finally choose her like he meant it?